The attorney across the table couldn't look me in the eye. That told me everything I needed to know before the mediator even opened the folder. "Mr. Calloway," the mediator said, adjusting her glasses. "Your son and his wife have filed this petition on the grounds that your recent medical diagnosis has, and I'm quoting their document here, significantly impaired your judgment and your ability to manage your financial affairs in a manner consistent with your long-term well-being." I let that sit in the air for a moment. I was 63 years old. I'd built a contracting business from a single pickup truck and a set of tools I'd bought used at an estate sale. I'd managed crews of 40 men, negotiated contracts worth millions, raised a son alone after my wife passed, and just 6 weeks earlier I'd been given a prostate cancer diagnosis that my own oncologist described as highly treatable, caught early, excellent prognosis. I was scheduled for surgery in 3 weeks. I was going to be fine. And my son Brandon and his wife Nicole were sitting 12 feet away from me, trying to get legal control of my finances. I turned and looked at Brandon. He was staring at the table. Nicole was staring at me with the particular expression she reserved for situations where she needed something, a practiced blend of concern and calculation, like a contractor bidding a job he'd already decided to lowball. "Is there anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" the mediator asked me. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to say that over the past 4 years, I gave my son and his wife approximately $340,000. A $180,000 investment in their restaurant that was never repaid. 38 months of mortgage payments at $3,800 a month. A truck. And when I called them in Florence to tell them I had cancer and I was scared and I needed someone to come home, Nicole told me, and I wrote this down because I knew I'd need to remember it exactly. She said, "Arthur, you're going to be fine. Don't ruin our trip over a routine procedure." Then she put Brandon on the phone and he said, "Dad, we'll be back in 2 weeks. You have Walt next door." I'd like the record to reflect that. Nicole's attorney touched her arm. She shook him off. "That's not what we were in the middle of. We're not here to relitigate the phone call," her attorney said. "No," I agreed. "We're here because after I came home from my oncology appointment alone and sat in my kitchen alone and called my son in Italy and was told my cancer diagnosis was an inconvenience to his vacation, I made some decisions. I stopped the mortgage payments. I updated my estate documents. And apparently those decisions made with a completely clear mind are now evidence that I'm not capable of managing my own affairs." The mediator looked at Nicole's attorney. "Counselor, your client's petition references a letter from a Dr. Amara Singh suggesting Mr. Calloway may be experiencing acute psychological distress affecting decision-making capacity. Do you have Dr. Singh present?" Dr. Singh provided a written assessment. "I'm aware. I'm asking whether Dr. Singh has examined Mr. Calloway in person." A pause. The assessment was based on a telephone consultation with Mrs. Nicole Calloway, describing her father-in-law's behavior. The mediator set the folder down with a particular kind of quiet that felt like a door closing. "I thought about the drive here this morning. Walt had offered to come with me and I'd told him I was fine. I'd taken I-5 south out of Edmonds with the windows down, even though it was 54 degrees, because the cold air felt like proof. I was still here, still sharp, still myself. I'd thought about my wife Margaret, who died 11 years ago and who would have had some very precise things to say about this situation. I thought about Sophie, Brandon, and Nicole's daughter, who was 9 years old and had called me 2 nights ago crying because her parents were fighting and she didn't understand why Grandpa wasn't coming to dinner anymore. I had not cried on the phone with Sophie. I had told her that everything was going to be okay, that adults sometimes had disagreements, that none of it was her fault, and that I would take her to Pike Place Market on Saturday if she wanted. She said yes. I said I'd bring the good camera, the film one I'd been teaching her to use. I had cried after I hung up. "This petition," the mediator said, removing her glasses, "is not supported by the evidence presented. Mr. Calloway, you are clearly competent, clearly coherent, and clearly within your rights to make whatever financial decisions you see fit. The petition is denied." She looked at Nicole's attorney. "Furthermore, the submission of a medical assessment obtained through a third-party telephone consultation, presented as clinical evidence of incapacity, is a serious matter. I'm recommending a review of that submission to the State Licensing Board." She closed the folder. Mr. Calloway's legal costs in responding to this petition, $9,400, are to be reimbursed by the petitioners within 45 days. Brandon finally looked up. His face was the color of old drywall. Nicole stood up so fast her chair scraped back against the floor. She said something to her attorney in a voice too low for me to catch. He responded. She turned and walked out without looking at me or Brandon. Brandon sat there another moment. I watched my son, who I had taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of a Fred Meyer on a Sunday morning in 1994, who I had driven to the emergency room at 2 a.m. when he broke his collarbone falling out of a tree, who I had lent $180,000 to, because he had a dream and I believed in him. I watched him sit with his hands flat on the table and stare at nothing. Then he got up and followed his wife out. My attorney, Frank, shook my hand. That went about as well as it could. They don't have $9,400, I said. I know. We have options when that deadline passes. I nodded. I picked up my jacket. I walked out into a Seattle afternoon that was doing what Seattle afternoons do in October, which is rain just enough to be uncomfortable without committing to anything. Walt was parked at the curb. I'd told him not to come. He was there anyway, reading a paperback with the engine running and the heat on. He was 67, retired from Boeing, and had been my neighbor for 19 years. When Margaret was dying, he had mowed my lawn every week for 4 months without ever asking or mentioning it. I got in the car. How'd it go? He asked, setting down the book. Petition denied. They owe me $9,400. They'll pay? No. Walt nodded slowly. He pulled away from the curb. Hungry? Starving. We went to a diner on Aurora that had been there since 1962 and had no reason to change. I ordered eggs and coffee and told Walt everything while the rain hit the window. He listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, with occasional small nods that meant he was actually hearing the words. What happens now? He asked when I finished. I don't know exactly. The house is behind on property taxes on top of everything else. Frank found out they'd been juggling credit cards to cover the mortgage gap, borrowed from Nicole's sister. Total debt is somewhere around $55,000. Walt whistled low. They built their whole life on a subsidy, I said. When the subsidy stopped, there was nothing underneath. I had given them that subsidy because I had believed it was love. I want to be honest about that, because when I've told pieces of this story to people, a few of them have said some version of you enabled it, and they're not entirely wrong. I've sat with that. I've turned it over in my hands the way you turn over a piece of wood, looking for the flaw in the grain. The truth is that when Brandon came to me with the restaurant idea, I saw something in his eyes I recognized. The same want I'd had at 28 when I started my own company. I hadn't wanted to be the father who said no to his son's dream. Margaret would have counseled more patience, more structure, alone with terms, a business plan reviewed by someone neutral. But Margaret wasn't there. And I was a man who missed his wife and loved his son, and had more money than I needed, and so I wrote the check. And then I wrote the next one. And the one after that. And somewhere in there it stopped being a loan and became an allowance, and somewhere after that it became an expectation, and somewhere after that I became, as Nicole once said, in a moment she may not have known I heard, the safety net. I had funded their life for 4 years. I had never once asked for the $180,000 back. I had never presented it as leverage. I had never held it over Brandon's head. And when I called from a parking garage outside my oncologist's office in Bellevue, hands not entirely steady on my phone, to tell my son that I had cancer, and I was sitting in my car trying to decide whether to be scared, the first thing Nicole said when she answered Brandon's phone was, "Oh, Arthur, that sounds stressful. What stage?" And when I said stage 2, localized, very treatable, she said, "See? Totally manageable. You'll be fine. We just got to Rome this morning, and the hotel is incredible." She then put Brandon on, and Brandon, who I had taught to ride that bike, who I had held at Margaret's funeral while he shook like something broken, said, "Dad, seriously, you're going to be okay. You have the best doctors in Seattle. You don't need us there." I had said okay. I had said have a wonderful time. I had said I love you. Then I had sat in the parking garage for 22 minutes. Then I had driven to Frank's office and updated my will. The mortgage payment that was due 4 days later did not go out. The first call from Nicole came 6 hours after that. I didn't answer. She called again. I didn't answer. By midnight, I had 31 missed calls, 17 from Nicole and 14 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Nicole calling from the hotel phone when her cell calls went unanswered. I saved the voicemails. The first 3 were controlled, careful, the voice she used when she was managing a situation. Arthur, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. Can you call me? By the 6th one, the control was slipping. Arthur, the mortgage payment didn't post. We need to talk about this. By the 11th, she had stopped calling it a misunderstanding. You are making a decision based on emotions after a very stressful day, and I need you to think very carefully about the consequences of I stopped that one there. Brandon called once, around 11 p.m. He said, Dad, Nicole's pretty upset. Can you just call her back so she knows everything's okay? I noticed he didn't ask if I was okay. I noticed he called to report Nicole's feelings, not his own. I saved that voicemail too. In the 2 weeks they finished their trip, Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast, I had surgery scheduled, spoke to my oncologist 3 times, had Walt drive me to 2 pre-op appointments, and received 67 missed calls, total, all from Nicole or the hotel phone. Brandon sent 8 texts. 6 of them were variations of Nicole wants to know, followed by something about the mortgage. One of them said, I hope the surgery goes well, Dad. One of them, the last one, 3 days before they flew home, said, Did you change the will? I didn't respond to that one. They arrived back in Edmonds on a Tuesday. Nicole came to my house that Thursday. I watched through the window as she parked her car, the Volvo I had not bought, but which was made possible by the $3,800 a month I'd been sending, and walked up my front porch stairs with the expression of someone who had decided to be reasonable. I opened the door before she knocked. I'd like to talk, she said. I know. Can I come in? I stepped back. She came in, looked around my living room the way she sometimes did, cataloging things, then sat on the couch. I sat across from her. Arthur, she said, I think we got off on the wrong foot when you called. I understand you were scared, and I'm sorry if I wasn't, if I didn't respond in a way that felt supportive. But the decisions you've made since then are affecting our family in serious ways, and I need you to understand that. I understand it very well, I said. The mortgage is past due. I know what the mortgage situation is, Nicole. I've been paying that mortgage for 3 years. She paused. Reset. Brandon and I have been going through a difficult time with the restaurant closing, and the restaurant closed 14 months ago, I said. In those 14 months, I continued sending money at the same rate I'd sent it while the restaurant was open. I didn't reduce it. I didn't ask for repayment. I kept sending it, and we're grateful. You called my cancer diagnosis a disruption to your vacation. Silence. I didn't say it that way. You said, and I have this memorized because I've had some time to sit with it, Arthur, you're going to be fine. Don't ruin our trip over a routine procedure. Her jaw tightened. You were panicking. Someone needed to be rational. I'd just been told I had cancer. I was calling my son, and Brandon was upset. He wanted to come home. I convinced him to stay because I knew you were going to be fine, and because cutting a $12,000 trip short over something that turned out to be... You talked him out of coming home. She stopped. He wanted to come, I said, and you talked him out of it. The careful, managed expression cracked just slightly, not with guilt, but with something closer to irritation at being understood correctly. The mortgage payment, she said, pivoting back, is not going to resume, I said. Neither is any other financial support. She stared at me. Arthur, I'm going to ask you to leave now. I have a pre-op appointment in an hour. You're doing this because you're angry. I'm doing this because I paid attention, I said, and I should have paid attention a long time ago. She left. She was back on the phone before she reached the Volvo. My surgery was on a Thursday. Walt drove me, waited through 4 hours of surgery and 2 hours of recovery, brought me home, and stocked my refrigerator with things a man eating soft food for 2 weeks could actually consume. Brandon texted that he hoped it went well. Nicole did not contact me at all that day, which told me she had decided on a different strategy. The petition arrived 3 weeks later. I was still moving slowly, still tired in the way that post-surgical fatigue operates, not sick, just dimmed, like a house running on backup power. Frank called me on a Tuesday morning and read me the document over the phone. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and listened. The argument was that my cancer diagnosis had caused a significant psychological event, resulting in impaired financial judgment evidenced by my sudden cessation of payments I had voluntarily made for years. Dr. Amara Singh, a therapist Nicole had apparently called and described my behavior to over the phone, had provided a letter suggesting I might benefit from a supported decision-making framework. They wanted power of attorney over my finances. I sat with the coffee for a while after Frank finished reading. Then I said, "Frank, what do we need to do?" We did it. It took 3 weeks and cost me $9,400 in legal fees that I was eventually awarded back, though the award is somewhat academic when you're dealing with people who are financially collapsing. After the mediation, after Nicole walked out and Brandon followed her, Walt drove me to the diner, and I ate eggs and felt something I hadn't felt in 4 months, which was tired in a clean way, not the tired of being afraid, or the tired of being betrayed, or the tired of waiting for something bad to happen. Just physically, cleanly tired in the way you feel after a long day of honest work. I came home and sat in my workshop. I build furniture. I have for 20 years, since Margaret bought me a weekend woodworking class as a birthday gift, and I discovered that working with my hands after a week of managing people was the only thing that reliably quieted my brain. I had been working in pieces and stages on a roll-top desk, white oak, traditional construction, the kind of joinery that requires patience and precision and will outlast everyone I know. I'd started it 2 years ago, and I picked it up and set it down whenever life allowed. It was maybe 60% done. I stood in the workshop and looked at the desk and thought about the past 4 months. The diagnosis, the phone call from the parking garage, the 67 missed calls, the petition, the mediator's face when she said petition denied. I ran my hand along one of the finished panels. The grain was perfect. This was going to be a good piece of furniture, Sophie called that evening. She was 10 now. Her birthday had been in September. During all of this, I had sent her a card and a check, and Walt had driven me to her favorite bookstore to pick out 3 books I thought she'd like. I had not been allowed to her party, Nicole having communicated through Brandon that it would be too stressful given the current situation. "Grandpa," she said. "Hey, Bug. How was school?" "Fine." "Grandpa, my mom and dad are fighting a lot." "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes adults go through hard times. Mom keeps saying bad stuff about you, and Dad tells her to stop, and then they fight about that." I closed my eyes briefly. "Sophie, I want you to hear this. None of what's happening between your parents and me is your fault. Not one piece of it. You're the best thing in this whole situation, and that's just the truth." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you and Dad going to be okay?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm working on it. Can I still come to Pike Place?" "Saturday. Bring the camera." She showed up Saturday with the old Nikon around her neck, and Walt drove us down because I was still a few weeks from driving comfortably. We walked the market for 3 hours, Sophie photographing flowers and fish, and a man playing saxophone by the main entrance. She had a good eye, this kid. She stopped and waited for the right moment in a way most adults never learned. At lunch, she ate a bowl of clam chowder that was bigger than her head and told me about a book she was writing about a horse who could smell weather coming. "What kind of ending does it have?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm waiting to see what the horse decides." I thought about that on the way home. 3 weeks after the mediation, Frank called to tell me what I already knew: they hadn't paid the $9,400. He laid out the options. I told him to initiate collection proceedings. The same week, through Sophie, I learned that the Volvo had been traded in for something older and less expensive. Nicole was reportedly furious about this. A month after that, Sophie reported, very quietly, that her father had moved into the guest room. I'd heard through Frank, who'd heard through the kind of small-town professional network that exists even in a city the size of Seattle, that Nicole had retained a divorce attorney. Brandon apparently hadn't known until she served him the papers. I was in the workshop when Brandon called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. "Dad." His voice was hollow in a way I hadn't heard since Margaret's funeral. "Brandon." She filed. He didn't say who. He didn't need to. I set down the chisel I was holding. "I'm sorry." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Are you? I'm sorry you're in pain." "Yes." Silence. Then she took Sophie to her mother's. Temporary custody arrangement while the divorce processes. His voice broke slightly on custody. That must be very hard, Dad. Long pause. Why didn't the mortgage payment go out? The first one. Why did you stop it that day specifically? I thought about the parking garage. The 45 minutes I spent sitting in my car after a doctor told me I had cancer. The call I made from that parking garage. Because I sat alone in a parking garage for almost an hour after my oncologist appointment, and the first person I called, Brandon said, "Don't ruin our trip." Silence so long I thought the call had dropped. Nicole answered the phone. He said finally, "You called back." Another silence. "I wanted to come home," he said. "I told her we should. She said you were catastrophizing, that the diagnosis was minor, that if we came back it would set a precedent for you to call us home over anything." He stopped. I let her talk me out of it. I know. I shouldn't have. No, I'm not asking you to forgive me for that. I don't think I'd forgive me. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly. I heard him exhale. The house is being foreclosed. We couldn't catch up on the property taxes. Where I have an apartment, small place in Kenmore. Sophie has a room there. He paused. I got a raise at work. I've been going in early, staying late, trying to actually earn something for the first time in a while. That's good. I have about $18,000 in debt when you add everything up. The $9,400 to you, credit cards, Nicole's sister. I'm paying it down. How long? 2 years. Maybe less if I stay focused. He said it the way someone says something they've actually calculated. Not estimated, calculated. That was new. And Sophie? His voice changed when I said her name. Softer, more frightened, more certain all at once. Joint custody. Nicole's fighting for more time, but I'm fighting too. She's not going to win. Good, I said. Fight for her. Dad. Pause. I'm not calling to ask for money. I want you to know that. I know I don't have the right, and that's not what this is. I know. I just needed you to know that I understand. What I did. What I didn't do. The parking garage. He stopped. The parking garage, Dad. I keep thinking about you sitting in the parking garage. I looked at the desk in front of me. The half-finished roll top. The white oak panels leaning against the workshop wall. The mortises cut clean and waiting for their tenons. Do you want to get coffee? I said. He said yes. We met at a place in Edmonds, 10 minutes from my house. The kind of coffee shop that has been there long enough to have regulars and doesn't need to try very hard. Brandon was already there when I arrived. He looked like someone who'd been sleeping badly for months, which he had. His jacket was a plain canvas thing, no logo, nothing expensive. His shoes were practical. He stood up when I walked in. I looked at my son, 50 pounds of pride stripped away, eyes that were asking a question they didn't know how to make into words. I sat down. He sat down. Tell me what you're going to do, I said. He told me. The debt plan. The apartment. The custody schedule he was proposing. The way he'd been showing up differently at work, not networking, not performing, just working. He talked about Sophie's horse story and how he'd been reading the chapters as she wrote them and leaving her notes. I listened. I'm not changing the will, I said when he finished. Not right now. Possibly not ever, depending on how things go. I'm not asking you to. But Sophie's education, college, whatever she needs, I'm handling that directly. A trust her parents can't touch. She shouldn't carry the weight of our situation. Brandon's eyes went wet. He looked down at the table. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. She's my granddaughter. It's not a favor. It's just what's right. We sat there. The coffee shop moved around us. Indifferent. I need to say something to you, Brandon said. He looked up. Not because I want anything from you. Not because I'm trying to get back in your good graces. Because you're my father and I need you to hear it. He took a breath. You called me from a parking garage after you found out you had cancer. And I let Nicole talk me out of coming home. I don't have a justification for that. I knew it was wrong when I let it happen, and I did it anyway. I chose her opinion over my own knowledge of what was right. And you sat alone in that parking garage, and then alone in your house, and went to your surgery, and came home to nothing but Walt, and his voice cracked. I'm sorry, Dad. Not as a strategy. Not because the money stopped. Because you were my father, and you were afraid, and I wasn't there. I studied him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 4 years, I said. He wiped his eye with the back of his hand. Okay, I said. Then we start from here. I did not say I forgave him. I wasn't sure I did. Not entirely. And I wasn't going to hand him something I hadn't actually decided to give. But I told him I was willing to find out what came next. Weekly dinners, him, Sophie, me, and Walt if he wanted to come, which he usually did because Walt had nowhere better to be and made excellent company. No money talk, no strategy, no performance. Just people eating food and trying to be honest with each other. Sophie came the first week with her camera and photographed everything my workshop. Walt's ridiculous collection of novelty coffee mugs, the white oak desk panels. She photographed me and Brandon sitting at the kitchen table, and I didn't know she'd done it until she showed me on the camera screen this tiny image of two men who looked like they were in the middle of something difficult and choosing to continue anyway. Can I print this one? She asked. You can keep it, I said. Nicole, I heard from Frank and later from Brandon himself, had moved into her mother's house in Renton with a bitterness she showed no signs of releasing. She'd gotten a job. She called Brandon occasionally to tell him things were his fault. He was learning, slowly, to let those calls go to voicemail. She had never called me again after the mediation. Not once. I found I didn't miss the calls. The $9,400 came eventually not as a payment from Nicole and Brandon, but as a settlement from the collection proceedings Frank had initiated, drawn from the house sale proceeds before Nicole's attorney could redirect them. It covered Frank's fees and left a small amount over. I put it in Sophie's education trust without mentioning it to anyone. It was a cold November Saturday when Brandon came over to help me in the workshop. Sophie was with Nicole that weekend. He showed up in work clothes and old boots, and I handed him the finishing instructions for the lower cabinet section, and we worked for 4 hours without talking much about anything except the desk. Brandon was a better carpenter than I'd remembered. He'd learned properly when he was younger, and his hands still knew things. He worked carefully, measured twice, asked before he did anything he wasn't sure about. Near the end of the afternoon, I sat back on my stool and looked at what we'd done. That's good work, I said. He ran his hand along the panel we'd joined. Check the corner for square. It is, he said, with something in his voice that wasn't pride exactly, more like recognition. When it's finished, I'm going to need a place to put it, I said. Don't look at me, he said. Kenmore apartment. I know. I'm building it for Sophie, for when she has a place of her own. Whenever that is. Brandon looked at the desk for a long time. White oak, traditional construction, built to outlast everyone who knew it was being built. She'll love it, he said. She'll have earned it by then, I said. So will you. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Walt came by around 5 with a bag of groceries and made dinner while Brandon and I cleaned the workshop. We ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and Sophie called in the middle of dinner to tell me the horse in her story had made its decision. She wouldn't say what it was, just that it was right for the horse, and she was very proud of how it turned out. I can't wait to read it, I said. It's going to be a really good ending, Grandpa, she said. Not perfect, but really good. After she hung up, Walt raised his coffee mug. 2 really good endings. I raised mine. Brandon raised his. Outside, Puget Sound was doing what it did in November, which was make everything look appropriately serious without committing to catastrophe. The light was going. The workshop was clean and locked. The desk was 65% done. I had started building it alone. That was changing. Slowly, piece by piece. The way things worth keeping always do with patience, with the right tools, and with honest attention to the grain of the wood. If you found something in this story worth holding on to, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below. I read everyone. And if you're coming back for the next one, subscribe so you don't miss it.